And we welcome you to part 2 of our team semifinals. In part 1, we showed you the first half. Part 2 will take you through the second half as we try to narrow our field of 4 teams down to 2 to see who will compete in our international team finals event, where Shu and Steve will have the call for you in our next episode. We'll be showing you each half one bowler at a time, and we start with our youngest girls age group. Here's Alana Brown coming out of the gates firing. Look at this, burying it in the Brooklyn pocket. Alana would start with the strike. She'd put 5 on it. En route to a very respectable 82 string, she would lead the youngest girls age group. Meanwhile, Kaylin over on lane 3 was doing all she could to pin. She did a good job getting that 10. She would finish with a 77. Then Ashley LaPlante over on lane 2. We didn't see much of her in the first half because she was too busy saving it up to make this beautiful shot. Take a look at her body English. She knew she had it all the way. Ashley LaPlante finishing with a 76 and a solid second half. Finally, Jenna Steves, she had a tough game, but we know we'll see her on the show again, and she made this pretty 10 en route to a 65 game. We move along to our youngest boys. Here's Ronnie DiBiasio. Barely keeping the ball on the lane. He would finish that box with a 9, and he would finish the game with a 90. Meanwhile, Nate Fontaine over on lane 2, doing his best Tom Olsta impression, gave a lot of shots, good tries. Nate was really on the object pin the entire half. He was pinning well, picked up a 10 there, nearly completed this difficult spare, picked up the 10 as well, and then finally in the 10th box, he broke the ice, converted the spare. He'd put on 5 on it for a 103 game. All smiles from Nate Fontaine. He impressed in his team event debut. Over on the other side of the lanes, Josh Daly would give this spare a nice bid. Wasn't able to convert it. He'd have a tough second half, but finished with a strong 79. And in the middle, Hunter Johnson, full of body English as always, trying to will these pins over. Gave it a nice run, couldn't get it. He'd finish the box with a 10 en route to an 84 string. He is getting high fives from the team. Go to our middle age group, Amanda Banks, consistent as always. Off the head pin, but doesn't make a difference. She drops 9, picks it up. Then she'd make her own luck later in the half, converting another spare en route to a 98 game. Next to her, Sonia buries the head pin on this ball, leaves just the 7 pin. She's all over it for the first spare of her Candlepin for Kids' career. She'd finish the string with an 84. Colleen Dumas on the far side of your screen, lane 5, dropping 9 on the first ball, picking it up for the spare. Colleen Dumas all over the single pin. She would finish with a 95. And finally, on lane 2, Justine DiBiasio picks up a spare of her own. High fives from the squad. She gets a final score of 103. On to our middle boys. Here's the incomparable Austin LaPlante. He wasn't able to get a mark, but he sure was able to pin. There's 10, 110, there's another. And there's a good bit of the spare there. He wouldn't get it, but he would pick up the 10. He would get a very solid 90 game with no marks. On the lane next to him, Cody didn't have a good first ball, but no matter. He picks up the spare. Right at the end of the string, he would put 6 on it, en route to a 93 game. Good game by Cody. There's Barry Sheffield, again my favorite. First ball's on the head pin all around, nothing to show for it, tough split, but he plays it perfect. Who needs the Canadian gutters? Barry Sheffield finding a home in the States en route to a 92 game. High fives from a lot of Canadian fans. Finally, on the far side, Aaron Souza Jr. burying the head pin there, strike right out of the gate, and then later on in the match, he would come up with a spare in the last box. He put 5 on it for a 103 game. High fives from lane mate Corey Gendro. Connie Webster, she had an awesome first half, full of spares. Second half, she wasn't able to quite put together the same first half she did. She was able to come up with a few spares. Here's her first ball, really working it on the lanes, leaving just the 4 pins, which she's not going to let get by her. She'd have an 81 after 6 boxes, struggle down the finish line, and she would end up with a 112. Next to her, Danielle Manser, trying to make this tricky shot, wasn't able to convert it. Danny didn't have her best day in the lanes, but we've seen her have her best plenty of times before. She'd finish with an 89. Next to her, Brianna Gendro on lane 4 picks up her first mark of the match. Brianna Gendro would finish with an 87. Last but certainly not least, Ariana DiBiasio. She struggled in the first half. We didn't see much of her, but she came up firing in the second. Here she is converting a beautiful spare in the 6th box. That one's worth a lot of high fives from the team, and she would single-handedly help get her team back into the match. Right after, she would fill it off the head pin. She would catch the break, get the 9, and wouldn't let it get past her. Picking it up, she put a 5 on that, a 10 in the next box, and then finally in the 5th, gives this beautiful spare a run, and then finally in the fourth box, she picks up this spare. 102 after 9, she would finish the string with a 111 game and a really remarkable 70 second half that got her team right back in the match. Her teammate, Jonathan Boudreau, picking up where she left off, burying the head pin, leaving this 8-pin drop. Didn't look like the wood was set up. Jonathan begs to differ. He gets high fives from the team. Jonathan finished with a very efficient 4-mark 128 game, no fill lower than 7 in the game. Nick Wildeman was able to piece some pretty shots together in the second half. When he found that head pin, it did some damage. So we see him picking up this spare here, and then later in the half, a big fill with the strike. Nick would finish with a 115 game. On the far side, another ball that was working well when it was on, Corey Gendro. Here he is picking up the spare after a tough first ball, en route to a 112 game. Finally, Anthony Delmonico had it all working, and he led everybody in the match. He had the high single of the event. Anthony Delmonico, a 3-mark second half, including, wait for it, this pretty spare shot. He would get another one to tack on for a big 139 single. Anthony Delmonico saving his best for when it counts. We would let Steve take a look at the scores and tally them up to try to find our winners. And here we go. Our final scores. Team America finished in 4th with a very impressive 563 score. Just above them was Team Apple Pie at 565. We mentioned Ariana DiBiasio's big half. It helped her team immensely, a 70 half that led her team to a 570 second place score. And then Team Slytherin out in front the whole way with a big 619 and impressive 100 average. We hope you check out our next match. Steven should be back in the booth to give you the finals. Don't miss it on Candlepin for Kids.